The chainsaw kicked through the last section of cedar trunk, and I killed the engine, letting the sudden silence wash over me like cool water. 8 hours of cutting, and my shoulders burned. Sawdust caked in every crease of my neck. But I'd cleared the section Weimar wanted done by Friday. It was only Wednesday. I pulled off my safety goggles and wiped the sweat from my face with my bandana, leaving probably more grime than I cleaned. The sun hung low over the hill country, turning the limestone bluffs pink and orange, and I stood there a moment just breathing air that didn't taste like two-stroke exhaust. This was the part of the job I actually liked. The after, when the work was done and the land stretched out quiet around me. The cedar breaks here in the Texas hills grew thick as walls, but we were clearing sections for Weimar's cattle operation, opening up grazing land that hadn't seen sun in decades. Hard work, but steady. I'd been doing it 8 years now, ever since I left my family's cattle operation when it went under. Turned out I was better at cutting things down than building them up. My truck sat 50 yards off, covered in a fine layer of caliche dust that turned it from blue to ghost gray. I loaded the chainsaw in the bed next to the fuel cans and spare chains, moving slow because my back always seized up if I hurried after a long day. 43 years old, and I felt every one of them in my lumbar vertebrae. I grabbed my water jug and drained half of it, lukewarm and tasting like plastic, then checked my phone. No service as usual. Not that anyone was calling. The drive back to my trailer took 15 minutes on the ranch roads, following the fence line past Weimar's cattle. Herefords mostly, red and white against the yellow grass, clustered around the stock tank in the evening heat. Old man Weimar ran about 200 head on this property, had owned it since before I was born. Good man, paid on time, didn't ask questions about why a logger wanted to rent a beat-up Airstream on the back 40 instead of getting a place in Fredericksburg proper. I liked it out here. Quiet. No neighbors close enough to hear if you wanted to drink yourself stupid on a Tuesday, which I did sometimes. Not often, just sometimes. The trailer sat in a clearing near a dry creek bed, surrounded by live oak and mesquite. I'd strung up some lights, kept a propane camp stove outside for cooking when the heat made the interior unbearable, which was most days from May through September. It wasn't much. Maybe 200 square feet of dented aluminum and 30-year-old upholstery, but the rent was cheap and it beat staying in Kerrville, where my ex-wife might see me at the H-E-B and remember all the reasons she left. I showered in the cramped stall that barely had enough water pressure to be called a shower, changed into clean clothes, and heated up a can of chili on the camp stove while the cicadas started their evening song. The sun dropped behind the hills, and the temperature fell maybe 5 degrees, enough to make sitting outside bearable. I ate straight from the pot, watching the stars come out one by one. In that way they do, in the country, where there's no light pollution. The Milky Way stretched overhead like spilled milk, and I thought about driving into Luckenbach for a beer, but decided against it. Saturday was close enough. I'd go into town then, restock supplies, maybe sit at the bar and have a conversation with another human being that lasted longer than morning and see you tomorrow. I remember thinking that night how this was enough. Not good, maybe, but enough. A man didn't need much. Work, shelter, enough money to keep the lights on and gas in the truck. The rest was just complications. And I'd had my fill of those. My marriage falling apart, the ranch going under, my father dying still mad that I hadn't saved it. All of that was behind me now. Out here in the cedar breaks, nobody expected anything from me except cleared acreage by deadline, and I could deliver that. Simple, clean. I finished the chili and rinsed the pot, hung it on the nail by the stove, and was about to head inside when I realized something was off. The cicadas had stopped. Just stopped. Mid-song, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there in the sudden silence listening and heard nothing. Not crickets, not the mockingbirds that nested in the live oak, not even wind through the branches. Just my own breathing and the blood rushing in my ears. Could be a storm coming, I thought. Animals got quiet before weather changed. Everyone knew that. But the sky was clear, stars bright as diamonds, and the air didn't have that electric feeling you get before a thunderstorm rolls in. I walked out past my truck, looking toward the tree line maybe 30 yards off, and saw nothing. Just darkness between the trunks, dense and complete. The silence pressed against my ears like water pressure. I stood there probably 5 minutes, waiting for the normal sounds to return, telling myself it was nothing. Just one of those weird moments that happen in nature sometimes. A hawk passes overhead and everything shuts up until it's gone. A coyote moving through. Something spooked them, and they'd start up again once it passed. But they didn't start up again. I went inside and the silence followed me, and I turned on the radio just to have noise, some country station out of San Antonio, and tried to convince myself I was being stupid. I'd been alone in the backcountry for 8 years. Silence happened, animals got quiet. This was normal, except it didn't feel normal. It felt like something was holding its breath. The next morning I woke before dawn out of habit and started coffee on the camp stove, while the sky lightened from black to purple to gray. The cicadas were back, thank God, singing like nothing had happened. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing, or made too much of it. A night's sleep changed perspective on a lot of things. I drank my coffee, watching the sunrise, paint the limestone bluffs, loaded my gear, and drove out to the work site. That's when I noticed the deer were gone. I'd been working this section for 3 weeks, and I'd seen white-tailed deer every single day. Does and fawns in the morning, bucks at dusk, always moving through the clearings or standing at the edge of the cedar breaks. Hill country was lousy with them, so many that ranchers considered them pests. You couldn't drive 5 miles without seeing one. But that morning, nothing. I spent an hour cutting and didn't see a single deer. Figured they'd moved off because of the chainsaw noise, which made sense. Animals avoided humans. Basic survival instinct. By lunch, I'd worked up a good sweat and walked back to the truck for water. That's when I saw Weimar's cattle. They were clustered at the far fence line, maybe 300 yards from where I was cutting, and they weren't grazing. They were just standing there, pressed against the fence like they wanted to be anywhere but here. All of them facing the same direction, away from the tree line. I walked over to the fence. The cattle shifted uneasily, lowing, and I could see the whites of their eyes. One of them had scratches across her flank, fresh, and they all looked spooked. Not normal cattle behavior. Not in the middle of the day when nothing was threatening them. I looked back at the cedar breaks, at the shadows between the trees, and felt that same wrongness from the night before settle in my gut. "Easy," I said to the nearest cow, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to her or myself. "You're all right." But she wasn't all right, and neither were the others. And I stood there with my hand on the fence wire, wondering what had them so worked up. Probably a mountain lion had passed through. We got them sometimes in the hills, big cats coming down from the Llano Estacado looking for easy meals. That would explain the deer vanishing, explain the cattle's fear. Made perfect sense. I tried to make myself believe it. That evening I drove past Weimar's house on my way back to the trailer and saw him standing in his yard, hands on his hips, staring at his stock tank. I slowed and rolled down my window. "Everything all right?" I called. He looked up and I could see the frustration on his weathered face. Weimar was 70 if he was a day, had skin like old leather from a lifetime in the sun. "Lost 2 calves," he said, "sometime in the last few days. Just gone." I put the truck in park and got out. Gone how? Hell if I know. No carcasses, no blood, no signs of struggle. They were just here Monday, and now they're not. He spat into the dirt. Checked the fences, no breaks. Unless they learned to fly, something took them. "Mountain lion," I offered. Though I wasn't sure a lion would take 2 calves and leave nothing behind. "Maybe." He didn't sound convinced. "Lost a dog too back in March. Old Blue, my healer. Found his collar out by the creek, but nothing else. Starting to think I've got a predator problem." We stood there in the fading light. 2 men looking at land that suddenly didn't feel as safe as it had a week ago. I thought about mentioning the deer, the cattle's behavior, the silence, but I didn't want to sound like I was making excuses if my work slowed down. Weimar was a good boss, but he was still a boss, and I needed this job. "Want me to keep an eye out?" I asked. "Wouldn't hurt. You see anything weird, you let me know." He looked past me toward the hills. "Something's off lately. Can't put my finger on it, but something's not right." I drove back to the trailer thinking about those missing calves, about how something big enough to take 2 Hereford calves without leaving a trace was something I didn't want to meet. Mountain lions didn't hunt like that. Neither did coyotes. Feral hogs would leave a mess. Whatever it was efficient and it was careful. And that thought followed me all the way home. That night I stood outside my trailer after sunset before the darkness got complete and listened. The cicadas were going, the mockingbirds settling into their roosts, all the normal sounds. But underneath it I heard something else, or thought I did. A rustling in the cedar brakes. Movement where there shouldn't be movement. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing. Just shadows and branches and my imagination running wild. I went inside and locked the door, which I never did, and I lay in bed with the radio on, not sleeping, just listening to the night outside and wondering what kind of predator took 2 calves and left no trace. Wondering why the cattle wouldn't graze near the trees. Wondering about that silence from the night before. That complete absence of sound, like everything with sense had shut up and hidden. It occurred to me then, lying there in the dark, that maybe they were hiding from something. That maybe they knew something I didn't. That maybe the animals in these hills had learned to recognize a threat that I, in my human stupidity, couldn't see yet. And that thought kept me awake until dawn, watching the ceiling, listening to the radio play songs I didn't hear, waiting for morning to come and make everything seem reasonable again. But reasonable was already gone, if I'd had the sense to recognize it. The wrongness had started, and it was only going to get worse. I decided to set up a trail camera on Friday morning. I had one in the truck bed, a cheap game camera I'd bought years ago for tracking deer on my father's ranch, back when that was still mine to worry about. Now it was going to tell me what was spooking Weimar's cattle and taking his calves, and then I could stop jumping at shadows like some city person who'd never spent a night in the country. The drag marks were what convinced me to do it. I'd found them Thursday afternoon while cutting near the tree line, deep gouges in the caliche soil, parallel lines about 6 feet apart, leading from the clearing into the cedar breaks. Too wide for feral hogs, wrong gait for a mountain lion. The marks were fresh, maybe a day old, and they disappeared into the thick brush where even my flashlight couldn't penetrate far. Something heavy had been dragged through here, or something heavy had walked through, and I couldn't tell which possibility worried me more. I strapped the camera to a live oak about 20 yards from the drag marks, angled it to cover the game trail that led deeper into the breaks. The bark was rough under my hands, and I fumbled with the mounting strap, my fingers clumsy with something I didn't want to name. Not fear, just caution. Healthy caution. I set the camera to trigger on motion, checked the battery, and backed away, making sure I wasn't in the frame. The red light blinked twice and went dark. Armed and ready. "Let's see what you are," I said to the empty woods, and my voice sounded too loud in the morning stillness. I went back to work, cutting cedar through the afternoon heat, and tried not to think about what the camera might capture. A bear, probably. We got black bears sometimes, coming down from the Edwards Plateau. Big ones, 500 pounds or more. That would explain the cattle's fear, explain the missing calves. Bears were strong enough to drag off livestock, smart enough to avoid leaving obvious signs. It made sense. Perfect sense. Except bears didn't usually hunt in hill country this time of year, and the drag marks were wrong for how a bear would move. Too deliberate, too measured, not the shambling gait you'd expect. But I pushed that thought down and focused on the work, on the clean bite of the chainsaw through wood, on the sweat running down my back and the ache in my shoulders. Concrete things. Real things. That evening I drove past Weimar's place again and found him standing by his barn with Sheriff Kimball, a thick man in a tan uniform who I'd met once or twice at Luckenbach. They were looking at something on the ground, and I pulled over, curiosity getting the better of me. "Magnus?" Weimar called when he saw me. "Come look at this." I got out of the truck and walked over. On the ground between them was a track, pressed deep into the soft dirt near the water trough. My chest went tight looking at it. It was a paw print, or something like a paw print, about 9 inches long and 6 inches wide at the pads. 4 toes with claw marks extending past them, each claw as long as my thumb. But the shape was wrong. Too elongated, the pad too narrow, and there in the center was something that made my skin crawl. A 5th mark, higher up, like a dew claw, except it was positioned wrong. Almost like a thumb. "Ever seen anything like that?" Kimball asked me. I crouched down, not touching it, just looking. The track was fresh, probably made that morning when the ground was still damp from the dew. Deep enough that whatever made it had been heavy, and the spacing of the toes suggested something that could grip, that could grasp. Nothing that lived in Texas hill country had feet like that. "No," I said, and meant it. "Could be a dog, maybe. Big dog." Kimball snorted. "That's no dog. Dogs don't grow that big, and they sure don't have feet like that." He stood up, hands on his belt. "I'm thinking someone's got an exotic pet that got loose. Maybe one of those wolf hybrids people breed illegally. You see anything unusual working out there, Magnus?" I thought about the silence, the missing deer, the drag marks leading into the cedar breaks. I thought about my trail camera, waiting to catch whatever made this print on its memory card. Nothing concrete, I said. Animal's been acting strange is all. Strange how? Spooked. Cattle won't graze near the tree line, haven't seen deer in almost a week. I pointed at the track. You think that's what's taking the calves? Either that or we've got a serious predator problem. Kimball took out his phone and snapped pictures of the print from multiple angles. I'll send these to animal control, see if they can identify it. Meantime, Weimar, you might want to keep your cattle penned up at night until we figure this out. Weimar nodded, but he looked worried. What if it comes for them in the pen? Then we'll hear it and we'll shoot it, Kimball said, with the easy confidence of a man who'd never seen anything that truly scared him. It's just an animal. Animals can be killed. I didn't say anything to that. I walked back to my truck, feeling their eyes on me, feeling like I should have mentioned more. Should have told them about the wrongness that had been building for a week now. But what would I say? That the woods felt bad? That the silence scared me? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd think I was some nervous city transplant who jumped at his own shadow. I'd worked 8 years building a reputation as someone reliable, someone who didn't cause problems. And I wasn't about to flush that away over bad feelings. But driving back to the trailer, I kept seeing that print in my mind. The size of it. The wrongness of that 5th digit positioned where no animal's dew claw should be. The depth of it, pressed into hard-packed soil like whatever made it weighed as much as a man and a half. I spent that night cleaning my Remington 8.7, the pump-action shotgun that had been my father's before it was mine. I hadn't fired it in maybe 6 months. Not since I'd shot at some coyotes getting too close to my trailer. I loaded it with 5 rounds of buckshot and set it against the wall by my bed, close enough to grab if I needed it. Then I felt stupid for being so paranoid, so I unloaded it and put it back in the closet. Then I felt more stupid for not keeping it loaded, so I loaded it again and left it by the bed. The radio played late into the night. Some talk show about politics that I didn't follow, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about that track, trying to make it fit into something I understood. A bear's print, maybe, distorted by the mud. An escaped exotic pet, like Kimball suggested. Someone's illegal wolf hybrid that had gone feral. All of those explanations were possible, technically possible, and I held on to them like drowning men hold on to floating debris. Saturday morning came cool and overcast, rare for late summer in the hill country. I drove into Fredericksburg and did my supply run. Groceries at H-E-B, fuel at the Circle K, a new pair of work gloves, because mine had split at the seams. The town was full of tourists like always, German heritage types wandering the antique shops and taking pictures of the old Sunday houses. I felt out of place among them in my work clothes and sawdust, like I'd wandered in from a different century where men still worked with their hands and didn't take vacations. I grabbed lunch at a food truck near the park, some kind of brisket taco that was mostly grease and regret, and sat on a bench watching families walk by with their kids and their dogs and their easy laughter. Normal people living normal lives, untroubled by tracks in the mud or silent woods or missing calves. I envied them in a way I couldn't quite articulate. They got to assume the world was safe, that the darkness held nothing worse than their own imaginations. I checked my phone and saw I'd missed a call from my brother in San Antonio. He called once a month like clockwork, duty more than affection, and I never knew what to say to him. He'd stayed in the city, got a job selling insurance, had 2 kids and a wife who made casseroles. We didn't have much in common anymore beyond shared DNA and a dead father. I thought about calling him back and decided against it. What would I tell him? That I was spooked by silence and animal tracks? He'd want me to come stay with him, get out of the back country, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. I drove to Luckenbach because I'd promised myself a beer and I needed to be around people, needed to hear normal conversation. The old dance hall was half full, couples at the tables, a guitar player on the small stage doing Willie Nelson covers. I sat at the bar and ordered a Shiner Bock, drank it slow, letting the cold bottle sweat in my hand. "You look like hell," the bartender said. Her name was Rita, 60-something with gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of drunk. "Work that bad?" "Work's fine," I said. "Just been a long week." "Heard Weimar lost some cattle. That got you worried?" Small towns, everyone knew everything. "Something's got them spooked," I admitted. "Don't know what yet." "My cousin runs sheep up near Llano," Rita said, wiping down the bar. "Lost 4 last month. No sign of what killed them, just gone. She's thinking chupacabra." She laughed at her own joke, but I saw the uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you think it is?" I asked. She stopped wiping and looked at me serious. "I think something's got the animals scared. And when animals are scared, there's usually a good reason. My daddy used to say, trust what the deer tell you. They know the land better than we do." "The deer are gone," I said. "Haven't seen one in a week." Rita nodded slowly. "Then maybe you should be gone too. Take a vacation, visit family, come back when whatever it is has moved on." I almost laughed. Vacation? Like I had money for that, like I had anywhere to go. But she meant well, so I just nodded and finished my beer and left a big tip on the bar. Driving back as the sun set, I thought about what Rita had said, about how I should leave, about how the animals knew better than we did. But leaving meant admitting I was afraid, meant running from something I couldn't even name. And I'd spent too much of my life running already. From my marriage, from the ranch, from every hard thing that required me to stand firm. I wasn't running this time. I'd set up the camera and I'd find out what was taking Weimar's cattle. And then I'd tell Kimball and they'd handle it and everything would go back to normal. That's what I told myself anyway. I checked the trail camera on Sunday morning, 2 days after I'd set it up. I unstrapped it from the tree and brought it back to my truck, loaded the SD card into my laptop on the tailgate. 47 images captured, most of them tree branches moving in the wind, a few of raccoons snuffling through the underbrush. Normal things. Nothing that explained the drag marks or the track by Weimar's trough. Then I got to image 32 and my hands went still on the keyboard. The timestamp said 2:17 a.m. Saturday morning. The camera had captured something moving past the frame edge, mostly out of shot. But there in the corner was part of a leg. Too thick for a dog, too thin for a bear, and covered in coarse gray-brown fur that caught the infrared flash. The leg bent wrong, not backward like a dog's hind leg, but forward, digitigrade, the way a bird's leg bends. But this was no bird. The foot at the end showed those same elongated toes from the print, those claws, that thumb-like dew claw pressed into the soil. I clicked to the next image. Same timestamp, 1 second later. The leg was moving, caught mid-stride, and I could see more of it now. Thick muscle definition under the fur, power in every tendon. Whatever this thing was, it was built to run, built to hunt. built to take down prey much larger than itself. Image 33 showed it mostly out of frame again, but there at the top edge was something that made my mouth go dry. An ear, pointed and upright, wolf-like but larger. And below it, barely visible, the suggestion of a snout, elongated with what might have been teeth, catching the flash. Image 34 was completely black. The camera had reset, or something had moved past the sensor too fast to capture. When it triggered again at 2:18, there was nothing there. Just empty trail and the drag marks leading deeper into the cedar breaks. And if I looked close, I could see fresh ones that hadn't been there when I'd set up the camera. I sat there staring at the laptop screen at those 3 images and felt my carefully constructed explanations crumble like wet paper. That wasn't a bear. That wasn't a dog or a wolf hybrid or any escaped exotic pet. That was something else, something wrong, and it had walked past my camera on 2 legs in the middle of the night while I'd been sleeping 20 minutes away. The sun was bright overhead. Traffic noise from the highway a mile off. Birds singing in the trees around me. Normal daylight world where things made sense. But those images on the screen belonged to a different world, a darker one, and I couldn't unsee them now. I ejected the SD card and put it in my pocket. Closed the laptop. Sat there breathing hard like I'd been running. My logical brain tried to reassert itself. Maybe it was a bear standing upright. They did that sometimes. Maybe the angle was wrong, the infrared distorting proportions. Maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see or what I was afraid to see, and reality was simpler than my imagination. But I'd worked in the backcountry for 8 years. I knew what bear prints looked like, knew how they moved, knew their size and weight and behavior. Whatever made that track by Weimar's trough wasn't a bear. And whatever walked past my camera at 2:17 a.m. wasn't anything I could explain away with daylight logic. I needed someone else to see this. Needed confirmation I wasn't losing my mind. I drove to Weimar's place and found him working on his tractor in the barn. Curse words echoing off the metal walls as he fought with a seized bolt. "Got something to show you," I called over the ratchet noise. He looked up, grease on his hands and frustration on his face. "This better be good. I'm 2 stripped bolts away from setting this thing on fire." I showed him the laptop, clicked through the 3 images, watched his expression go from curious to confused to concerned. He leaned in close, squinting at the screen. "What the hell is that?" he asked finally. "Was hoping you'd tell me." "That's no bear." "No." "No dog neither." "No." He straightened up, wiping his hands on his coveralls, though they just spread the grease around. "You're telling me that thing is what took my calves?" "I'm not telling you anything. I'm showing you what my camera caught." I clicked through the images again, slower. "You ever seen anything like that before?" Weimar was quiet a long time, staring at the screen. Finally, he shook his head. "My granddaddy used to tell stories about things in the hills. Things that walked on 2 legs but weren't men. Said the Comanche had names for them, wouldn't camp in certain places because of them." He looked at me. I always thought he was full of shit. "Maybe he was," I said, needing to believe it. "Maybe." Weimar didn't sound convinced. "You showed this to Kimball yet?" "No. Wanted you to see it first." "Well, he needs to see it. Whatever that thing is, it's on my property killing my stock, and the county needs to deal with it." He grabbed his phone from the workbench. "I'm calling him now." Kimball arrived 40 minutes later in his county cruiser, stepped out all business and authority with his thumbs hooked in his belt. I showed him the images on my laptop and watched his face cycle through the same reactions Weimar's had: curiosity, confusion, dismissal. "That could be anything," he said finally. Camera was too far away, bad angle, night vision distortion. Hell, could be a person in a costume for all we know. A person in a costume dragging off calves? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Weirder things have happened. We had a guy a few years back dressing up like a deer during hunting season, damn near got himself shot. People do stupid things. He handed back the laptop. "Look, I'll file a report, send this to animal control like I said, but I'm not launching a manhunt for Bigfoot based on 3 blurry photos." "I'm not saying it's Bigfoot," I protested, though I didn't know what I was saying it was. "Good. Because Bigfoot lives in the Pacific Northwest, not Texas." Kimball grinned like he'd made a joke. "You boys are getting worked up over nothing. Probably a big dog. Maybe a wolf hybrid, like I said. They can get pretty huge, walk on their hind legs sometimes. Animal control will set some traps, we'll catch it, and this'll all be over." He left, his cruiser kicking up dust on the ranch road, and I stood there with Weimar feeling dismissed and stupid. Like we were children reporting monsters under the bed. "That went well," Weimar said dryly. "Yeah." "You believe him? About it being a dog?" I looked at the laptop, at those 3 images burned into my memory. At that leg, with its wrong bend, that ear, that suggestion of teeth. "No," I said. "I don't believe him." "Me neither." Weimar sighed. "But I don't know what else to do about it. Can't shoot what I can't see, and I'm too old to go hunting in the cedar breaks after something that might be a whole lot more dangerous than a dog." I didn't tell him I was thinking the same thing, that I was thinking about packing up my trailer and heading back to civilization, where the scariest thing was traffic, on A35. That I was thinking about Rita's advice: take a vacation, come back when it's moved on. But I'd set up that camera to get answers, and all I'd gotten were more questions. And questions had a way of eating at you, demanding resolution, pulling you forward even when forward was the last place you wanted to go. That night, I sat outside my trailer with the shotgun across my lap and watched the tree line as darkness fell. The cicadas sang their normal song, the mockingbirds settled in, and the world looked exactly like it had looked every night for 8 years. Peaceful, safe, mine. But I knew now that was an illusion. That something walked in those cedar breaks on 2 legs, something wrong, something that didn't belong in any field guide or wildlife manual. And it had been close to my camera, close to my work site. And if it took 2 calves, what was stopping it from taking more? What was stopping it from taking me? The temperature dropped as midnight approached, and my back started aching from sitting on the camp chair, but I didn't go inside. Couldn't go inside. Because inside meant closing my eyes and sleeping meant being vulnerable, being prey, and every animal instinct I had was screaming at me that prey was exactly what I'd become. I must have dozed off around 1 a.m. because I jerked awake at the sound of nothing. Complete nothing. The cicadas had stopped again, the way they'd stopped that first night. And the silence was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat thudding against my ribs. I stood up fast, the camp chair tipping over behind me, the shotgun suddenly heavy in my hands. The flashlight was on the ground, and I grabbed it, thumbed it on, swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing, just shadows and branches and the normal shapes of a Texas night. But the silence held, pressed against my ears like hands cupping them, muffling everything except my own breathing too loud and ragged. Then I saw them. The eyes. two amber-green points of light catching my flashlight beam, reflecting it back at me with that distinctive eye shine you get from animals at night. But these eyes were wrong. They were too far apart, spaced like a man's eyes instead of a dog's or cat's. And they were too high, 8 feet off the ground at least, unless whatever they belonged to was standing on something, which it wasn't because the ground there was level. I stood frozen, every muscle locked, my finger on the flashlight button pressed so hard it hurt. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared back at me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Because animals don't stare like that. Animals either run or attack or ignore you, but they don't stand perfectly still and watch you with something that feels like thought, like consideration, like judgment. "Get," I said, and my voice cracked. "Get out of here." The eyes tilted slightly, like the head they belonged to had cocked to one side, curious. Then they moved left to right, tracking, not moving away, but moving parallel to my position. And I realized it was circling, keeping the same distance but changing its angle, getting a better look at me. My hands were shaking so bad the flashlight beam wobbled, and I brought up the shotgun one-handed, pointing it at where I thought the body must be below those eyes. "I'll shoot," I said, louder now. "I will shoot you." The eyes stopped moving, held position for maybe 10 seconds, though it felt like an hour. Then they dropped suddenly, down to maybe 4 feet off the ground, and I understood it had gone to all fours. And even on all fours it was massive, bigger than any dog, bigger than any wolf. And I watched those eyes sink lower as it moved back into the cedar breaks, back into shadows where my flashlight couldn't reach. Then they were gone, and the silence held for another minute before the cicada started up again, like someone had flipped a switch, and the normal night sounds rushed back in to fill the void. I stood there shaking for a long time, the shotgun pointed at empty darkness, my finger on the trigger, with way too much pressure. If a branch had snapped right then, I would have fired, would have emptied all 5 rounds into the trees, and probably wouldn't have hit anything but my own fear. Eventually my breathing slowed and my hands had steadied enough that I could lower the gun. I backed toward my trailer, keeping the flashlight pointed at the tree line, not turning my back on it until I was at the door. Then I got inside fast, locked it, checked all the windows, and sat on my bed with the shotgun across my lap, and every light in the place turned on. The radio played until dawn, commercials and songs and talk show hosts discussing things that didn't matter. And I sat there watching the windows and telling myself what I'd seen was a bear. Had to be a bear. Bears had eyeshine. Bears could stand on their hind legs. Bears were big enough to have eyes that high off the ground. But I'd seen bear eyes before. Bear eyes were small and close set, not wide apart like a human's. And bears didn't move like that, didn't circle with that kind of predatory intelligence, didn't watch you with such focused intent. The sun rose eventually, turning my windows from black to gray to gold, and I finally set down the shotgun and made coffee with hands that still shook. Normal morning routine, normal day ahead. I had trees to cut, work to do, and I couldn't afford to miss days because I'd gotten spooked. But I knew what I'd seen in those cedar breaks, even if I couldn't explain it. Knew those eyes belonged to something that shouldn't exist, something wrong, something that made every animal in these hills go quiet when it passed. And I knew it had been watching me, considering me, deciding whether I was threat or prey or just something curious to observe. I didn't know which possibility scared me most. The work had to go on. I couldn't afford to lose this job. Not with my ex-wife's lawyer still sending letters about arrears and the truck payment coming due. So I showed up that morning like nothing had happened. Joined Rawlings and the rest of the seasonal crew Weimar had brought in to help me finish clearing his back sections, and ran the chainsaw through cedar trunks. While my mind kept replaying those eyes, that circling movement, the way it had dropped to all fours. Rawlings noticed I was off. He was the kind of guy who noticed everything, 20 years older than me. Face like tanned leather. Had been logging since before I was born. "You look like hammered shit," he said during the mid-morning water break. "Didn't sleep great," I said, which was true enough. "You sick?" "Can't have you running the saw if you're not focused. That's how people lose fingers." "I'm fine," I said, "just a rough night." He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral, but if you start making sloppy cuts, I'm pulling you off the job." I nodded and got back to work, focusing on the physical labor, the familiar rhythm of the saw, the smell of fresh-cut cedar that at least covered other smells, the kind that hung around the tree line, the kind that smelled like wet dog and something rotting. We worked until 5 that afternoon, and I volunteered to stay late to finish a section we'd started. Rawlings gave me a look but didn't argue. Overtime was overtime, and he knew I needed the money. The rest of the crew loaded up their trucks and headed out, dust trails following them down the ranch road. And then I was alone with the darkening sky and the tools and the trees we'd felled. I should have left with them. Should have packed it in and driven to town and had a beer at Luckenbach and pretended everything was normal. But I needed those extra hours, and besides, it was still light out, still safe. Still daytime when things made sense. I worked until the sun touched the hills, and that's when I decided to check the woodpile. We'd been stacking the cut cedar near the road for pickup, and I needed to tally the cords for the invoice. Simple job. 5 minutes, maybe 10. The pile was on the edge of the clearing, about 50 yards from where the uncleared cedar break started. We'd stacked it neat, logs sorted by size, and I had my clipboard and pencil and was marking counts when I heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of sound. The cicadas cut out mid-song, the way they had that first night. The wind died, and I felt that crawling sensation on the back of my neck, the one that comes from deep in the brainstem, the part of the brain that still remembers being prey. I turned slowly, not wanting to see but unable not to look. It was at the woodpile, maybe 20 feet away, and this time there was enough light left to see details. The hand came first into my awareness. It was gripping one of the cedar logs we'd cut, and my brain tried to process what I was seeing and failed, kept failing, because nothing about it made sense. The hand was massive, easily twice the size of mine, with fingers that were too long and joints that bent wrong. Black claws curved from the fingertips, thick and sharp, digging into the wood, but it was the texture that made my stomach drop. Dark fur covered the back of the hand, coarse and matted, but the palm was bare, showing skin that looked almost human except it was dark gray and leathery. The fingers flexed, and I heard the wood creak under the pressure. Saw those claws dig deeper grooves into the cedar. Then the arm attached to that hand came into view, and I saw it was covered in the same coarse fur, gray-brown, darker in patches, and the musculature underneath was wrong. Too developed, bunched, and corded like a bodybuilder, but arranged in ways that didn't match human anatomy. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stand there with my clipboard hanging forgotten at my side as more of it emerged from behind the woodpile. The shoulder appeared, hunched and massive, and then the torso. And I saw it was on all fours, but the stance was wrong. The proportions impossible. The back legs were bent at angles that looked painful, digitigrade like a dog's, but scaled up to nightmare size. And the spine had this ridge of muscle running along it that flexed as it moved. Then it turned its head and I saw the snout. It was canine. Had to be canine. But it was too long, too heavy, too much like a wolf's skull had been stretched and thickened and modified by something that didn't understand quite how wolves were supposed to look. The muzzle was broad and powerful, and when it opened slightly, I saw teeth. Yellow-white, too large, the canines as long as my fingers. But it was the eyes that destroyed me. Because they weren't dog eyes, weren't wolf eyes, weren't any kind of animal eyes I'd ever seen. They were amber green in the fading light, too human in their placement, too intelligent in their focus. And they were looking directly at me. The smell hit me then, rolling across the 20 feet between us like a physical thing. It was the smell from the tree line, but concentrated, overwhelming. Wet fur and musk, and something rotten underneath. Something that smelled like meat, left too long in summer heat. Like a dead animal split open and crawling with flies. I watched those 2 human fingers flex again on the cedar log, watched the claws score deeper into the wood, and some part of my brain that was still capable of thought registered that it was strong enough to tear that log apart without effort, strong enough to do the same to me. Its lips peeled back from those massive teeth, and I realized it was smelling me, tasting my scent on the air. The muzzle wrinkled, nostrils flaring, and I saw the intelligence behind those eyes processing information, categorizing, deciding. Jesus, I whispered, and the sound of my own voice broke whatever paralysis had held me. The thing's ears, pointed, mobile, too large, swiveled toward me at the sound. Focused. And that head tilted to one side in a gesture that was so eerily human it made my skin crawl. I took a step backward, then another. The creature didn't move, just watched me with those amber-green eyes, and I saw its chest rise and fall with breath, saw the muscles along its spine flex, saw intelligence in how it held, perfectly still. "I'm leaving," I said, voice shaking. "I'm going to walk to my truck and I'm leaving." The head tilted the other direction, curious, considering. The ears swiveled again, and I realized it was listening not just to my voice, but to everything. My heartbeat, my breathing, the shuffle of my boots on the dirt. I took another step back, then another, moving slow, trying not to trigger a chase response. The creature watched but didn't follow, and I made it another 10 feet before it moved. It dropped the cedar log. Just opened those terrible fingers and let it fall. And the sound of it hitting the ground was like a gunshot in the silence. Then it turned fully to face me, and I saw the whole thing for the first time. 7 feet tall at the shoulder, even on all fours. Muscles like steel cables under that matted fur. The ridge along its spine flexing with each breath, and those legs, bent wrong, digitigrade, built for speed and power in equal measure. I ran. Didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just turned and bolted for my truck, clipboard flying from my hands. I heard it behind me, not footsteps, but the sound of something massive moving through grass. A huffing breath that wasn't quite an animal sound, wasn't quite human. My truck was 100 yards away, and it felt like 100 miles. My boots pounded the dirt, and my breath came in gasps, and I could hear it gaining. Could smell that rotten meat musk getting stronger. could feel the ground shake with impacts that were too close, too fast. I hit my truck door and yanked it open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and jamming my hand on the lock button. My keys were in my pocket, and I fumbled for them with shaking hands, dropped them, grabbed them off the floor mat, shoved them at the ignition and missed and tried again. The truck started and I slammed it into drive and floored it, fishtailing in the dirt, and in my rearview mirror I saw it, standing up right now, fully bipedal, 7 feet tall at least, maybe more. The proportions all wrong but undeniable in the dying light. Those arms hung too long, nearly to its knees, and the legs were bent at that digitigrade angle, and the torso was broad and powerful and covered in that gray-brown fur. And the head. God, the head! The wolf dog skull with those 2 human eyes, watching my truck tear down the ranch road, watching me flee, and I swear I saw its lips pull back in what might have been curiosity or might have been something worse. Then I hit the county road, and it was gone from my mirror, and I drove to my trailer with my hands locked on the wheel and my heart trying to hammer through my ribs. I sat in my truck outside the trailer for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The sun was fully down by then, and the stars were coming out, and the hill country night was settling in around me like a blanket made of shadows. My trailer looked wrong when I finally got out. The door was how I'd left it, locked, and the windows were intact. But something felt off, felt violated, felt like the space belonged to something else now. I unlocked the door and went inside and turned on every light I owned. Then I grabbed my shotgun and checked every room, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Empty. Safe. But it didn't feel safe. I made coffee because I couldn't think of what else to do, and while it was brewing, I noticed things. Small things. Wrong things. My work boots, which I'd left by the door that morning, were moved. Not much, maybe 6 inches. But I remembered placing them neatly together, and now one was tilted, knocked aside. And there were marks on my door frame. Scratches, fresh, right around the lock. Like something had tried to figure out how the mechanism worked. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured a cup with hands that shook so bad I slopped it on the counter. I didn't clean it up. Just stood there holding the mug and staring at those scratches on my door frame and understanding with terrible clarity what they meant. It had been here, at my trailer, while I was at work. It knew where I lived. I checked the windows and found more scratches on the sill of my bedroom window, like something had tested whether it could get in. Found a smear on the glass that might have been from a nose pressed against it, breathing fog, looking inside at my empty bed and my clothes and my life. My cell phone was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, and I picked it up and stared at it and tried to think who I could call. The sheriff? And say what? That I'd seen something impossible and it was stalking me and had come to my trailer? They'd think I was drunk or high or crazy. Weimar? He'd already told me he wasn't interested in my ghost stories. Kimball? He was a good boss, but practical, no nonsense, would tell me to sleep it off and get to work in the morning. My brother down in San Antonio, maybe. But we hadn't talked much since the divorce, and calling him out of nowhere to say I was being hunted by something that shouldn't exist seemed like a good way to get him worried for the wrong reasons. I set the phone down and drank my coffee and accepted that I was alone with this. Whatever this was, whatever had been watching me from the cedar breaks and circling my position and now knew where I slept. The scratches on my door frame caught the light. fresh wood showing pale against the weathered trim. I touched them with my finger, felt the depth of the gouges, understood the strength it would take to carve wood like that, understood what those claws could do to flesh. I picked up my cell phone again and opened the browser and searched for large canine Texas hill country and got results about coyotes and the occasional wolf sighting near the border. Searched mysterious animal attacks Gillespie County and found nothing recent except some mentions of feral hogs. Searched large bipedal animal Texas and got results about Bigfoot sightings, cryptid enthusiasts, blurry photos that proved nothing. Nothing that matched what I'd seen. Nothing that explained it. I closed the browser and pulled up my contacts and stared at the names and numbers and realized I had no one to call. No one who would believe me. No one who could help. The coffee was cold by the time I finished it, and night had fully settled outside my windows. I checked all the locks again, checked the scratches on the door frame and the window sill, and understood that locks wouldn't matter. If it wanted in, it would get in. If it wanted me, it would take me. I was prey now. Had been since that first night when it circled my position in the cedar breaks. Maybe before that. Maybe from the first day we started cutting trees on this ranch. And prey doesn't get to decide when the hunt ends. I sat on my bed with the shotgun across my lap and every light blazing and the radio playing country music that I didn't hear. Outside my windows, the hill country night pressed close, full of darkness and silence, and something that was watching, waiting, deciding when to make its move. And I understood with absolute certainty that running wouldn't help. It knew where I worked, knew where I lived, knew my patterns and my schedule and my vehicle. It had been learning me, studying me, the way a predator studies prey before the kill. I was trapped. Had been trapped since the moment those eyes appeared in my headlights, and there was nowhere to run that it couldn't follow, nowhere to hide that it couldn't find me. The radio played on into the night, and I sat awake watching the windows, waiting for those amber-green eyes to appear in the glass, waiting for the sound of claws on metal, waiting for the moment when the thing outside decided I was worth the effort of taking. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Just sat there on my bed with the Remington across my lap and the lights burning and the radio cycling through the same rotation of songs I'd heard 100 times before. My eyes ached from staring at the windows, watching for movement, for shadows, for those amber-green reflections that would tell me it had come back. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway, just to have something to do with my hands. Besides, grip the shotgun so tight my knuckles went white. Around 3 a.m, I heard something outside. Not loud, just a soft scraping sound against the trailer's aluminum siding. Metal on metal, deliberate, testing. I stood up slowly, shouldered the shotgun, moved toward the living room window where the sound was coming from. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, in my fingertips, wrapped around the gun. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in, broken only by the radio's tinny music and my own breathing too loud in my ears. I waited, shotgun raised, staring at that window and the darkness beyond it. Nothing. Just my own reflection staring back at me, wild-eyed and pale, looking like a man who'd already lost his mind. Then I heard it at the back of the trailer, the bedroom window, the same slow, deliberate scraping, testing the frame, testing the lock, learning. I moved down the narrow hallway, past the closet where my chainsaw sat silent, past the bathroom with its flickering fluorescent, to the bedroom where I'd slept 8 years without worry and now would probably never sleep again. The window was dark except for my own reflection, and I stood there with the shotgun pointed at glass, at darkness, at nothing I could see. The scraping stopped again. I counted my heartbeats, counted to 30, counted to 60. The radio played behind me, some old George Strait song about Texas and highways and going home. I wondered if I'd ever have a home again, if any place would ever feel safe after tonight. That's when I saw them. The eyes. Not in the window, but beyond it. Deeper in the darkness, reflecting nothing because there was no light to catch. Just amber-green fire hanging in the black, spaced too far apart, too high off the ground. Watching me through the glass, watching me watch them. I'd seen those eyes before, but this time they didn't move, didn't blink, just hung there in the darkness like something patient, something that had all the time in the world and knew I didn't. I raised the shotgun higher and the eyes didn't react, didn't shift, didn't acknowledge the threat. Because it wasn't threatened, it was deciding. Then it moved closer and I saw it, all of it. The shape resolved out of darkness like something coming into focus, like waking from a dream into worse nightmare. It stepped into the pale spill of light from my window, and I saw what had been stalking me, what had driven every animal from these hills, what had carved those scratches into my door frame and windowsill. 7 feet tall, standing upright on legs that bent wrong, digitigrade like a dog's, but thicker, heavier, wrapped in muscle and coarse gray-brown fur that caught the light in patches. The torso was wrong, too human in its proportions, but broader, deeper through the chest, ribs expanding and contracting with breaths I could see even through the glass, arms too long, hanging past where its knees would be if its legs bent right, ending in hands that were almost human except for the black claws curving from each finger, 3 inches long and sharp enough to carve wood, sharp enough to do worse. But it was the head that stopped my breath, the head that made every rational thought evaporate and left only primal terror flooding through my veins. Wolf skull, but wrong. Extended snout full of teeth too big, too many, yellow, white, and curved for tearing. Ears high and pointed, swiveling independently, tracking sounds I couldn't hear. And those eyes, amber green and intelligent. Too intelligent. Looking at me not like an animal looks at prey, but like something thinking, calculating, understanding what I was and what I could do and deciding it didn't matter. When it opened its mouth, I saw the tongue, black and too long, lolling between those terrible teeth. Saw the way its lips peeled back in something that wasn't quite a snarl, wasn't quite a smile. Saw the ridge of muscle along its spine ripple as it shifted its weight, dropping slightly into a crouch. It raised one hand and placed those claws against my bedroom window. Gentle, almost delicate. Traced a line down the glass with one curved talon. The sound setting my teeth on edge, making my finger tighten on the shotgun's trigger. The glass didn't break, but I saw it flex, saw the stress lines spider out from where that claw pressed. Then it tilted its head, that dog-wolf skull cocking to one side, and I swear to God it looked curious, like it was studying me, like it was trying to figure out what I'd do next. I did the only thing I could think of. I fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space, louder than anything I'd ever heard, and the window exploded outward in a spray of glass and buckshot. The thing reeled back, disappeared into darkness, and I heard something, between a yelp and a scream. Too human, too wrong. My ears rang so loud I couldn't hear anything else. Couldn't hear if it was coming back. Couldn't hear my own breathing or the radio or my own voice shouting something that might have been words. I pumped another shell into the chamber and waited, shotgun pointed at the empty window frame with its jagged teeth of broken glass. Wind rushed in, carrying the smell of cordite and that musk, that terrible wet dog and carrion smell that made my gorge rise. I waited for it to come back, to reach through the window with those two long arms and those claws, to finish what it had started. Nothing, just wind and darkness, and that smell fading slowly, leaving behind only the cordite and my own fear sweat and the coppery taste of adrenaline on my tongue. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, shotgun raised, ears ringing, every muscle locked tight and screaming. When it didn't reappear, I backed out of the bedroom, keeping the gun trained on that empty window frame, and made my way through the trailer grabbing anything I could. Wallet, keys, phone. The work shirt draped over my chair. Didn't bother with anything else. Didn't care about tools or clothes or the deposit I'd lose or the explanation I'd have to give. I just ran. Out the trailer door, across the gravel lot, to my truck parked 20 yards away in the darkness. My hands shook so bad I dropped the keys twice before getting them in the lock, wrenched the door open and threw myself inside and jammed the key into the ignition, and the engine turned over once, twice, and died. No. My voice came out cracked, desperate. No, 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 no. I turned the key again and the starter ground and caught, and the engine roared to life. And I threw it in reverse and backed up so fast I nearly hit the fence post behind me, spun the wheel, shifted to drive, and floored it down the ranch road, with my door still hanging open because I hadn't taken time to close it. Hadn't taken time for anything except getting the fuck out of there. The headlights cut through darkness, and I watched the mirrors, watched the road behind me, watched for movement in the cedar breaks on either side. Nothing, just darkness, and the white Caliche road stretching behind me, and the speedometer climbing past 40, past 50, the truck bouncing over ruts and holes I couldn't see in time to avoid. Then I saw it in my driver's side mirror, running on all fours, loping along the road behind me, keeping fucking pace at 50 miles per hour, muscles bunching and releasing under that gray-brown fur, tongue lolling between those teeth, eyes catching my taillights and reflecting them back at me in amber-green fire. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. The truck shuddered and climbed to 60, and the engine screamed, and still it kept pace, didn't fall back, didn't slow, just ran behind me like something that could run forever, like something that would never stop. The county highway came up faster than I expected, and I hit the brakes too hard, fish-tailed onto the asphalt, nearly rolled into the ditch before regaining control. Jerked the wheel straight and accelerated again, heading east toward town, toward lights and people and anything that wasn't alone in the darkness with that thing behind me. When I checked the mirror again, the road was empty. Nothing following, nothing visible, just darkness and my own wild eyes staring back from the reflection, and the knowledge that it had let me go, had decided I wasn't worth pursuing onto the highway, wasn't worth revealing itself to someone who might see. Or maybe it just knew where I lived and figured it could find me anytime it wanted. I drove for 2 hours straight without stopping, pushing the truck as fast as it would go, watching the mirrors constantly, flinching at every shadow that might have been movement, Didn't stop until I hit the outskirts of San Antonio and pulled into a gas station with fluorescent lights blazing and other people pumping gas and everything normal, everything safe, everything that wasn't the darkness and that thing with amber green eyes. My hands were still shaking when I killed the engine. My shirt was soaked through with sweat. And when I tried to get out of the truck, my legs nearly gave out. Muscles turned to water from adrenaline crash. I caught myself on the door frame and stood there breathing hard, trying to remember how to function like a person instead of prey. My brother's apartment was on the north side of town. I called him from the gas station, hands still shaking so bad I could barely work the phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and I tried again and again, until finally he picked up sounding groggy and annoyed. "Magnus, the hell time is it? I need to stay with you." My voice came out wrecked, raw from screaming I didn't remember doing. "Just for a few days. I'll explain when I get there, but I need to come now." Silence on the other end, then, "You okay? You sound, I'm fine, I'm coming over. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up before he could ask more questions I couldn't answer, bought a 6-pack from the gas station and drank 2 beers sitting in my truck under the lights before I felt steady enough to drive again. The alcohol didn't help the shaking, but it took the edge off the hyperventilation, off the feeling that I was going to fly apart at the seams if I didn't get myself under control. My brother was waiting outside his apartment when I pulled up, standing in the parking lot in sweatpants and an old Spurs jersey, arms crossed. He looked worried, which made sense given I'd called at 4 a.m. demanding to crash at his place. What didn't make sense was how to explain why. "You look like shit," he said when I got out of the truck. Then he saw the scratches on my arms, the ones I'd gotten diving through the trailer window's broken glass, and his expression changed. "Jesus, Magnus, what happened?" "Had a problem at the ranch. I grabbed my wallet and keys and left everything else. Boss went crazy, came after me with a knife. Had to bail out a window." The lie came easier than I expected. Easier than the truth would have been, because how do you tell someone you saw something impossible? How do you explain what was hunting you without sounding insane? "You call the cops?" "Not yet, will tomorrow. Just needed to get out of there first." He didn't believe me, I could see it in his face, but he also didn't push. Just nodded and led me inside to his couch and got me water and a blanket and told me to get some sleep. Like sleep was something I could do anymore, like closing my eyes wouldn't just show me those amber green eyes staring back. I lay on his couch with the lights on and listened to him snore in the other room and watched the windows, waiting for those eyes to appear in the glass. They didn't. But I knew that didn't mean anything. It knew my truck, knew what I looked like, knew my scent. If it wanted to find me, it could. Distance didn't matter. Safety didn't matter. I was prey, and would be prey forever. When morning came, I called Weimar and told him I was done. Wouldn't be coming back. Had a family emergency in San Antonio. Needed to quit immediately. He could keep my deposit and sell my tools to cover any damages. He sounded confused. Said something about the trailer being smashed to hell, asked what happened. I told him feral hogs and hung up before he could ask more. Then I called Rawlings and quit the logging crew. He tried to talk me out of it, said I was his best sawyer, said whatever was going on, we could work it out. I told him I was done with backcountry work, done with hill country, done with all of it. He got quiet and then said he'd heard I'd been acting strange, asking weird questions about the wildlife, And maybe I needed some time off, but didn't need to quit. I thanked him and hung up. That was 2 years ago. 2 years since I ran from that ranch, with my door hanging open and that thing keeping pace behind me. 2 years since I saw something that shouldn't exist and learned I was prey. I never went back to the hill country, never even drove past I-35, the invisible line I'd drawn between safety and that darkness. I got a job at a lumber yard in Austin, working, receiving, unloading trucks, and checking inventory, indoor work. Fluorescent lights always on, other people always around. The pay was worse, but I didn't care. Money didn't matter when you were just trying to stay alive. I sold my truck 3 months after that night. Couldn't stand looking at it, couldn't stop checking the mirrors for something running behind me. Bought a sedan instead, something anonymous, something that wouldn't trigger memories. Took the bus when I could, even though it took twice as long, because there were other people on the bus, witnesses, safety in numbers. Moved to a third-floor apartment complex on the east side. Paid extra for one with external stairs where I could see the parking lot, see anyone approaching. Installed motion lights at my own expense when the landlord said no. Bought blackout curtains so nothing could see in at night. Bought another Remington 870 since I'd left my father's behind when I fled, and kept it under my bed loaded with slugs this time. Buckshot hadn't stopped it. Slugs might not either, but at least I'd know I tried. My brother thought I'd had a breakdown. Kept suggesting therapy. Kept asking what really happened that night. Kept trying to get me to talk about it. I never did. How could I? How do you explain that you'd seen something that couldn't exist but did? Something that hunted you? Something that would have killed you if you hadn't gotten lucky? He stopped asking after a while. Started avoiding my calls. Last time I saw him was 6 months ago at a family thing. And he looked at me like I was a stranger, like the brother he knew had been replaced by someone else. Maybe I had been. I tried dating once. Nice woman I met at a coffee shop, pretty smile, easy to talk to. We went out twice, and she suggested camping at Pedernales State Park for our third date. Thought it would be romantic. I made an excuse about work and never called her back. She texted a few times, confused, then stopped. I deleted her number and tried not to think about the life I could have had if I'd never worked that ranch, never seen those eyes, never learned what was out there in the darkness. I drink more now. Not enough to be a problem, or that's what I tell myself, but enough to quiet the thoughts at night, enough to dull the memories, enough to make sleep possible for a few hours before the nightmares wake me up. The nightmares are always the same. Running down a dark road with something behind me, something I can't see but know is there, keeping pace, patient, waiting for me to tire. I wake up sweating and check the locks and turn on all the lights and sit with the shotgun across my lap until morning comes and makes everything seem almost normal again. I can't handle silence anymore. Always have the TV on or the radio or something making noise, because silence means something's listening. Silence means it's close. My coworkers think I'm weird, the way I flinch at shadows, the way I won't take smoke breaks behind the building after dark, the way I insist on keeping the loading bay doors closed, even when it's hot. They don't know. Can't know. I'm the weird guy who works receiving and keeps to himself and drinks alone and probably needs help but won't take it. I check the news from Gillespie County sometimes, online because I won't drive out there. Every few months there's a report about missing livestock, strange animal attacks, calves vanishing without trace. Last month there was an article about a hunter who swore he saw something impossible in the cedar breaks, something that walked on two legs and had the head of a wolf. His friends laughed it off, called it too much whiskey and not enough sense. But I read that article 3 times and felt something cold settle in my chest because I knew. I knew what he'd seen, knew it was still out there, still hunting. I thought about reaching out to him, thought about sending an anonymous email or message explaining that I'd seen it too, that he wasn't crazy, that it was real. But what would that accomplish? We'd both still be living in fear, both still be checking shadows, both still be prey. Better to stay silent? Better to pretend it never happened? Better to try to function and work and live something approximating a normal life, even though normal was gone forever? My apartment lease is up in 3 months. I've thought about moving farther east. Houston, maybe, or all the way to Louisiana. Thought about putting more distance between me and those hills. But I understand now that distance doesn't matter. That thing covered ground at 50 miles per hour, could probably go faster if it wanted, could track me by scent or pattern or instinct or something worse. I'm not running anymore because there's nowhere to run to. I'm just existing, day by day, trying to get through each night without seeing those amber-green eyes in my windows. Some nights I lie awake and wonder if it's forgotten about me. If I was just one deer among many, one piece of prey that got away and it's moved on to easier targets. But I don't believe that. I remember the way it looked at me through that window, the intelligence in those eyes, the way it studied me like something solving a puzzle. I think it remembers. I think if I went back to hill country, it would know, would find me, would finish what it started. So I stay away. Work my job at the lumber yard, live in my 3rd-floor apartment, keep my shotgun loaded and my lights on and my radio playing all night. I haven't slept through the night in 2 years and probably never will again. Haven't felt safe in 2 years and probably never will again. Haven't been west of I-35 in 2 years and probably never will again. I'm alive. That's what matters. I survived when I should have been torn apart in that trailer, when I should have been dragged into the cedar breaks and left in pieces for the turkey vultures. I got lucky, got out, got away. But the cost was everything else. My work, my home, my peace of mind, any chance at normal life. The cost was becoming someone who checks locks constantly, who flinches at shadows, who can't be alone in the dark without feeling hunted. Sometimes I wonder if I really got away at all, or if I'm still running down that ranch road in the darkness, with something keeping pace behind me that will never stop, never tire, never quit. If I'm still prey, and always will be, just waiting for the moment when it decides I'm worth pursuing again, when it's had enough of other targets and remembers the one that got away. I don't have answers. Don't know what it was or where it came from or why it was in those hills. Don't know if there are more of them or if it was something singular, unique, one terrible thing that I had the misfortune to stumble across. Don't know if it's still in Gillespie County or if it roams, hunting across the hill country, leaving silence and terror in its wake. What I know is this: it's real. I saw it. I survived it. And I'll never be free of it. Not really. Because even here, 3 floors up with locks and lights and a loaded shotgun, I check the windows before bed. Listen for the sound of claws on glass. Watch for amber-green eyes reflecting back from the darkness. And I know that someday, somehow, I'll see them again. Because prey doesn't escape. Prey just runs until it can't run anymore. And I'm still running, will always be running, even when I'm standing still. That's what it took for me. Not my life, but the possibility of living it. Not my body, but my peace. Not my death, but the knowledge that it's out there, waiting, patient. And someday, our paths will cross again. I'm alive, but I'm not living. And there's a difference there, one I understand now in ways I wish I didn't. Tonight the rain falls on the parking lot below my third-floor window, motion lights flickering on and off as the wind stirs the trees. I hold my coffee cup with both hands and watch the darkness between the lights and think about cedar breaks and silence and eyes that saw me as prey. I'm 300 miles from those hills, but it might as well be 3 feet. Distance doesn't matter when you've been marked. When you've been chosen, when you've seen something that can't exist but does. And when the lights flicker and go out for just a moment, when the darkness presses close and the rain sounds like claws on glass, I grip my coffee tighter and remind myself that I'm alive, that I survived, that I'm 3 floors up behind locked doors with a shotgun under my bed, but my hand still reaches for the light switch, and my eyes still scanned the darkness. And some part of me is still running, will always be running, watching the rear view mirror for something that keeps pace and never tires and waits, patient, for the moment when I slow down. Because prey doesn't stop being prey just because it got away once. And somewhere in the hill country darkness, something still remembers.